Just when India's economy was beginning to recover from the aftermath of the first COVID wave, the second monster surge hit. And how? Almost 98% of the country is currently in various shades of lockdown, putting India's growth in peril. The virus is threatening to infect the economy once again. But will the impact this time be more or less severe? Here's our lead story tonight.
The country's financial capital. The country's IT capital. The country's very own Detroit. The country's national capital. No Big Bang announcement like March last year. But 98% of India is under some sort of a lockdown, localized or state-wise. This is to fight the second and a more devastating surge.
The pandemic's toll on the economic health is quite visible. Consumer sentiment has taken a huge hit after the devastating second wave. Retail shops are shut, though large factories are still working following COVID protocol and transportation between states is going on. But in a country like India, where 60% of the GDP runs on consumer sentiment, the economy will be hurt regardless.
Worrying signs have emerged in the formal sector. The Centre for Monitoring Indian Economy has placed the country's unemployment rate at a 4-month high, with more than 7 million jobs lost last month. Of them, more than 3.5 million were salaried employees.
A secular decline in salaried jobs. Between January 21 and April 21, nearly 9 million salaried jobs were lost. So that's really big. And in April, we saw 3.84 million salaried jobs getting lost. So that's the secular decline I worry about.
With tighter virus restrictions in place again, various rating agencies have downgraded India's growth from previous projections. Prospects of recovery aren't as bullish as they were a couple of months ago.
It's going to be fairly tough times for us this year because overall consumption is going to be retarded, primarily on account of limited growth in jobs, limited growth in income, and to top it all, more expenditure on health and healthcare, which means there's less money left for discretionary spending. So I think this all fits into this picture of saying that growth is going to be lower at around 9.2%. Of course, there's always a downward bias because today we are trying to hypothesize as to how the virus would pan out, how the lockdowns would work out.
The back office of the world's financial industry, for instance, is battling a ferocious rise in the number of cases.
Soaring cases in Bengaluru have impacted work-from-home operations of several global companies. Many employees are either reporting sick or attending to family emergencies.
Unlike the first wave, the second has penetrated the villages deeply. Earlier this month, an SBI research reported that the share of rural districts in new cases has increased to 48.5% in May as compared to 36.8% 2 months ago.
This time, I think the cases are increasing in rural India, and they can disrupt rural activity, which is now about 50% of India's GDP. Takes place in comes from the rural part of India. So I think that needs to be monitored very carefully.
For now, though, the restrictions don't threaten to derail the economy completely. They are instead expected to help break the chain of transmission. But full immunity to humans and the national economy perhaps depends on how this period is used to inoculate the population. Bureau Report, India Today.
How badly will this COVID wave impact India's economic prospects? How much time will it take between the end of the wave and the recovery process to kick into motion? And have we followed the right economic strategy to try and minimize economic damage? To talk about these very important questions, I'm joined on this broadcast first by Niranjan Hiranandani, founder and managing director of the Hiranandani Group in Mumbai. I have Ila Patnaik, professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, one of our best-known economists. Nilesh Shah joins us, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Kotak Mutual Fund. For a contrarian perspective, I have Professor Arun Kumar, well-known economist, and Shankar Iyer, who's an author, has been a member of the India Today Group, and a leading economist in his own right. I want to go across to Niranjan Hiranandani first, because there are some similarities and yet many differences between the first COVID lockdown and what we are seeing across the country at this moment. Can you at the outset give us your view on how badly will India's economic prospects be hit because of the second COVID wave in comparison with the first wave? Niranjan Hiranandani.
I think, first of all, Rahul, the shock waves which have hit the country is unimaginable. Hence, consumer sentiment is really, really depressed. The positive sign is that the lockdown at this point of time is a little less severe. For example, construction work can continue. Some of the operations where the factories are open in situ, those activities are definitely continuing. However, the issues in terms of health is really horrendous. I couldn't have dreamt in my entire life that such a situation could ever happen in a country like India, least of all in cities like Delhi or Bangalore or Goa or whatever. I think this is something which we are not able to grope with, and I think that's a setback which is going to be huge. So coming to your answer, Rahul, I think the difference which has taken place over here is a mental setback which is far more severe than it has been in the earlier times. And the kind of problem that we see in our hospitals is far more severe, that the severity of the disease in many aspects of it has been quite high in the younger age group. And what is scaring me, that if the vaccines don't come fast enough, the third wave is going to help and hit the children. This is something which I cannot understand, how we could not have worked on it. A lot of this was flagged off and done. But I think on the economic side, so to say, we maybe have certain sectors which are good and will continue to do. Steel is doing fantastic. The prices are too high. Cement is doing very well. The prices have gone up. All these things, some sectors are definitely doing well. But there is so much unemployment, and there are sectors like travel, tourism, hospitality, the small MSE workers and workforce. I think the government will have to come up with a kind of a package which they did last time, or a little more than what they did last time.
So we'll build on some of what you're saying. I want to go across to Professor Ila Patnaik. Dr. Patnaik, can you give us your sense of how India's growth projections for the first quarter of this year are going to be hit? How badly impacted is our economy because of the second wave?
See, in 2020, in the April to June quarter, we had a 24% contraction of the economy because of the nationwide lockdown, which was across the entire country. What we are talking about now is a reduction in the growth rate at which the economy will rebound. So the economy was expected to grow back at, for the year, sometimes some people projected 11%, some people were projecting 12%, some people even more. And those growth projections have been pared down. So the first thing to notice is really that it's not that we are saying the economy will contract, because currently we don't have a nationwide lockdown. While there are many local lockdowns, there are restrictions, and that is impacting the economy. And it is because of that impact that growth projections are being cut by various rating agencies, by the others as well. Whoever is making forecasts, they will cut those forecasts, and they will say the economy may grow at less than 10%. Now, so let's be very clear that it's not that there is a contraction this year, but it's only that the growth rate is lower. Second, the question is, at what pace will we come back? Now, this is going to depend on the scale and the amount, the numbers who are going to get affected as this wave goes across the country. If it gets localized to certain urban centers like Delhi, and if already we are starting to see an improvement, whether it is because people have become more cautious or partly because there is immunity, The immunity is both because of COVID as well as because of the vaccine. But if that gets contained, then the pace at which the economy can start recovering again will be fast. But if that doesn't happen, that's a combination of both social behavior as well as government policy. And if that doesn't happen, then it could persist, because it could be like, ripples going through the economy. And the big difference this time, I think, as the previous speaker correctly pointed out, is that while last time it was a supply side effect, you just shut down production, and so it was shut down, and then you said switch on, you can come back, though it was done slowly. But this time there's also a demand side effect. This demand side effect this time is more important because the well-off have been hit by the virus. And it is the well-off whose consumption, whether it's hospitality, aviation, it's people who have money to spend. And if their demand is restricted, if they are not feeling optimistic and their demand goes down, then the total demand impact for the economy can be quite high. Okay. So that's the other big difference.
Okay. So, Nilesh Shah, we're seeing in the markets, while there have been some minor corrections and the markets haven't really gone up from where they were, but net they've been holding firm. Do you accept that this seems to be a disconnect between an economy that is in decline at this moment with an uncertain recovery time frame? Or do you believe that the markets are really looking ahead and are optimistic that soon the second wave will end and the pent-up demand will lead to the economy bouncing back faster than people think right now?
Rahul, in my opinion, there will be long shadow of second wave on Indian economy. This time, active load cases are far more than first wave. It is widespread in rural India. In the first wave, it was more an urban phenomena. And consumer sentiment has been hit hard as number of cases have been higher. And finally, MSME sector, which had become vulnerable during first wave, is again taking the brunt of second wave. Now, at this point of time, markets are discounting that with vaccination, we will be able to contain COVID-19. With COVID-appropriate behavior, we will be able to contain impacts of COVID-19. We will be able to kind of do regional and rotational lockdown and avoid national lockdown to reduce the impact of second wave on economic activities. There is no disconnect between market and economy. Markets are taking 15-20-year view where a 3-4 months disruption does not matter much. However, what is discounted by the market in terms of containment of COVID does not materialize, then there will be always a correction in market.
You use the term long shadow. Have you attached a time frame to how long you think this shadow will be? So from the time caseloads become manageable and these lockdown restrictions end, what is your projection, Nilesh, about how long the shadow of the second surge will be?
A lot will depend upon what steps are taken to reduce the impact of these long shadows. So for example, in rural India, can we provide Manrega kind of solution? Can we support rural economy? Monsoon, which is expected to be good, does that become really good? Then these long shadows can be contained. The consumer sentiment, it has been impacted because we are all witnessing COVID-19 in our near and dear ones. Now, if we are able to quickly contain it, like in Mumbai, then certainly the long shadow will be shorter. But if it takes time to contain, we will have to take steps to revive consumer sentiment. So a lot will depend upon what steps are taken to reduce the long shadows.
Okay. Shankar Iyer, your sense of how badly impacted the Indian economy will be? We're seeing already from Nomura to JP Morgan, Standard & Poor's, Crystal, Moody's, all of them reduce India's growth prospects for this year by at least 1%, in some cases 2+. How long do you, in your estimate, is the shadow going to be, and how much do you see the second wave drag down India's growth prospects?
Well, Rahul, the first thing to recognize is that the hope and the optics of the V-shaped recovery is now at the intersection of the virus and vaccination. We were supposed to clear 300 million people by the end of July. We are at 170, 180 million now. And we have all the issues enveloping, wrapping the vaccination process. The economy is sort of on oxygen. The informal sector is probably in the ICU, and the MSMEs are, depending on where they are, who they are competing with, are experiencing mild symptoms to some of them are probably on the ventilator. The issue that we face now is that in the last wave, the rural economy stood by and provided some sort of buffer. This time that has been hit. The second more important, which all the other panelists have also highlighted, is that consumer sentiment has been hit really hard. This has come into your living room. The 6 degrees of separation that we saw in the previous wave has gone. So consumer sentiment is going to be affected. A lot will depend on how the government responds to the issues. I suspect that we will have to review the budget that we saw in February. The budget rested on 4 critical pillars. One is the rollout of vaccination. We know where that is. The second part was on privatization to beef up revenues and costs. That we know where it is. We also were expecting infrastructure to be taken up by the state governments. And now that 90% plus of the states are under some form of lockdown or the other. So we are facing actually what we know gives us an idea of the parade of unknowns that we face. I think the first step will have to be to review the budget. We will have to provide for the rural economy. The interest rates in the US have changed. The commodities are suspected to be in some sort of super cycle. So all of these will impact our plans. And I think that the issue has to be looked at now and really urgently.
Okay, so all of you are calling for some kind of a new economic package. There hasn't been any talk about from the government just yet, but I'll come to that in a moment. I want to ask Arun Kumar first about his sense of the kind of dark shadow this second wave is causing and is likely to cause going forward.
So, there is a huge uncertainty, as everybody has pointed out, because we don't quite know how long this wave will last. We can guess from the last wave what happened, or from the example of UK or Brazil, what might happen in the Indian economy. If you look at it, Brazil never imposed a lockdown, and their first wave and second wave merged, and it is continuing at 13 months. If you look at UK, the second wave lasted about 8 months with a slight dip in between in the month of November, and then a pickup in December, January. And that wave was about 8 months, and that was because they delayed the lockdown. Similarly, in the US, when there's a delay in the lockdown, the wave lasted. And if you look at India's wave, the first wave, the wave went on from March up till mid-September, and the mid-September was the peak. So you can say that it sort of abated only by about October or November. Now, if some of these things are there, and we have delayed our, lockdown this time much more than what we did last time. If you remember, in February last year, we had 10 cases, and then we peaked in September at about 98,000. Whereas this year in February, when the peak was at the lowest point, the minimum, that was about 9,500 cases. And then the cases started rising, and they went up to about 4 lakh cases. So I think the peak is going to be there probably somewhere around June, and then it might abate, but it will abate very slowly. And I think we are going to be into October, November before we can really think of opening up our economy. So if you look at Q1 of this year would be very similar to Q1 of last year. April this year is better than April last year, but May is roughly around the same as May last year. And June this year would be much worse than the June last year. So in Q1, the growth would be very tepid. In the Q2, again, because the wave would last up to sometime like October, depending on the vaccination. Therefore, Q2 would be much less than what it was last year. And Q3 and Q4 would be very uncertain because we have very little idea about what is happening with vaccination. If we were to achieve herd immunity, and if that was 60% of the population, then, we needed to have 1.7 billion vaccinations. which meant that, every month we needed to do about 170 million vaccinations every month. We started with only about 10 million a month in the month of January, and we haven't ramped it up enough. So I think the vaccination, for 60% would take at least.
Okay, so you're writing off completely Q1, in Q2 as well till about October, November. You think
yes, and
the economic activity will not bounce back? Ila Patnaik, is that a very negative and dismal? Yeah, go on, Arun Kumar.
Given the consumer sentiment is down, and it was already down in January at 55.5 according to the RBI, and the capacity utilization was down to 63%. And that has fallen further, so both consumption and investment will be down. And also, one other thing that we need to take into account is that we are the economy worst hit at this point of time. Other economies are reviving. So capital flow out might take place, and what will happen is commodity prices are likely to rise. So in a situation where we are already facing trouble, if commodity prices rise outside, that will worsen the situation for us. And if capital flight takes place from the economy, that will further worsen the situation.
Ila Patnaik, is that overly negative and dismal portrayal of the situation, or do you also think that if you're down till November, then virtually more than half the year is written off, and this is 2021 is almost as bad as 2020?
So, as you said, this is not a contraction. Now we are talking about the pace of expansion. And when we just use the words the economy is declining, or we use the words the economy is down, in fact, that creates panic, because people who have come out of 2020, when there was an actual contraction, start thinking that we are talking about a contraction of the economy. So let's just please not do, use these words so loosely. We need to be very clear that when we are saying rating agencies have paired with their growth forecast, then we are talking of growth, which is positive growth. So it is very, very different from last year when the economy was contracting. So I'm not so negative, because I don't think I heard any of the others say that the economy would actually keep contracting and would contract.
Shankar, Ila Patnaik makes an important point that while growth projections are coming down, it's not as if the economy is slipping into negative zone, unlike what happened last year, and therefore Arun Kumar may be portraying a more abysmal or dismal picture than is actually warranted.
Well, it's a view. I mean, that view is qualified. Arun Kumar is qualifying it with how we proceed with our vaccination and opening up. We have had a lockdown which is not called a lockdown, and I suspect that when we open up, it won't be opening up. So we have to be cognizant of what is ahead of us, just as the acquaintance with experience should give us the acquaintance with knowledge. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at an economy which contracted, last year, and we, from the 2019 level, went back to somewhere around 2017. We are at 2.5 trillion. Even if we grow at 9%, we will take a couple of years to reach 2019 again. So that's something that an economy, the demography, the poverty levels that we will face following the pandemic, we have to be cognizant of that. So that is what I'm saying, that we are not saying that the economy is contracting, but that the picture doesn't look very bright. And this is something that has to be planned now. You have to think about how you're going to prop up investment. What are you going to do with your disinvestment plan, which was supposed to be pumping roughly 2 lakh crores into the economy. The government is going to borrow 12 lakh crores this year, Rahul. And so these are important issues. The government will have to look at where it will find the resources to prop up the economy, how it will do it, what will be the timing of it, and how will they ramp up the vaccination.
Okay, so let's now come to the second part, which has been touched upon in bits, but I want to dwell on it further. Has the government followed appropriate COVID interventions when it comes to vaccinating the economy? Could more have done? Should more be done now? Because the government's approach roughly has been that let's deal with the health emergency first. And once people are safe, or as many as possible are alive, then we'll come to trying to restore livelihoods, because the first priority is to save lives. So there hasn't been any economic package announced in the midst, because the focus has been on dealing with the medical emergency. Is that, in your view, Niranjan Hirandandani, the right way to go about approaching the current situation? Because you in your opening interventions asked for a new economic package. The government's approach seems to be slightly different.
Rahul, I absolutely agree that lives are most important. And vaccination has to be the core of the entire thing, whether you make a new budget or you do anything else, import the vaccines or whatever it is. Everything that we are talking about rests on the fact that we will be able to vaccinate our people. Anything which is required by the central government to change its economic budget, its economic ideas, at the state level, central level, private level, public level, NGO level, whatever you want to do, vaccinate faster. I'm not seeing that. I'm not hearing as much as we need to do on the vaccination side. Of course, the media is talking about it, but I'm not seeing it actually on the ground. And I think they have to focus on that and do it. The second part of it, how can you keep the idea of economics away from it? So many people have become unemployed in this country at this point of it. So many sectors have been badly affected. Even if you have a 10% growth on the top of it, what about the people who are unemployed? We need the NREGA. We need the industries to be taken. You need the SMEs to be taken care of. All this needs to be done. Yes, if you have to do another budget to do it, I don't care. That's only a formality. What we know is that both the segments have to be done together. You can't say we won't look after the economy because you'll have enough people dying of starvation because they won't have money. They won't be able to have incomes. What are they going to do?
So the government's government's view, right or wrong, is that nobody is dying of starvation and that a package should wait till the wheels of the economy come into motion. Nilesh Shah, in several capacities you advise the government as well. Do you agree with the current view at the finance ministry and at the highest levels in the government that let's focus on the medical emergency, or are you also of the view that some kind of an economic package needs to be handed out now because that is required for survival and sustenance?
So there is already work done in terms of monetary stimulus by RBI. They have provided liquidity in the banking system. While American interest rates have gone up 3 times from the bottom, Indian interest rates have hardly moved. So they have managed rates pretty well. They have managed currency quite well. And financial system today is far more stable compared to the first wave. So monetary stimulus is already there. Now, on the fiscal stimulus side, we don't have the luxury like America, where 42% of unemployed Americans are getting more money sitting at home than what otherwise they would have get by working in, various places. Now, we don't have that kind of fiscal space. Rating agencies will not tolerate that kind of fiscal stimulus from our side. So we have to, like first wave, keep on watching the vulnerable section of the economy, rural India, MSME, and continue to take appropriate steps which will ensure that those sectors remain on the growth path. If I have to look at top down, we need to focus on exports because global market, global world, GDP is recovering faster. We have seen good export expansion in the month of March, but unfortunately in April, that momentum has not been maintained. The second thing is, without raising fiscal deficit, how can government spend money to support economy? And the answer there is very simple. You have to carry out divestment, as Mr. Iyer mentioned. You have to carry out asset monetization, which will help you raise resources. And you have to raise resources by gold amnesty scheme kind of thing, which will give money in the pockets of government to spend.
Okay, so you broadly made the point that enough is being done already. At some stage, more may need to be done, but it's not as if the government's taken its eyes off the wheel when it comes to ensuring that people are taken care of. Dr. Patnaik, do you agree with that view, or do you believe that this is the stage where a lot more actually needs to be done from the side of the government?
So if you look at Manrega numbers, that gives you a glimpse of the spending that will happen even without a new package. Last April, so April 2020, there were 1.2 million households that were demanding Manrega jobs. This April 2021 data shows that they are 2.24 million households that are demanding jobs. this really tells you that there is a mechanism which is, in place, but not by new announcements, which can help the poor. Now, if in addition, and many of the migrants who have gone back again after the second wave could be partly responsible for this. Now, this could be something that would help them. In addition, certainly PDS giving grain again is something that I think has been announced, but also will need to be extended if this wave continues and the ripples go through the country. So I expect that some small measures will be done. There could be more measures from the RBI, which are directed at liquidity or which are trying to help small industries. But you see, the big factor that is missing because of the way the economy, the structure of the economy is, that it's not that we have payroll data. It is not that government can say, okay, I'll pay 60% wages of all the way it was done in Europe or America. So that's not something that is easy or even possible for us to do. Some measures have been taken to make migrant databases and so on, but it remains to be seen how effective they'll be.
Arun Kumar, do you have a, as always, contrarian view on this, Professor? Do you believe that enough is already being done? Let's wait till this wave subsides and then try and see if we can bring out some other kind of a package?
Well, what you say is a contrarian view is actually what the reality is. I said, in fact, about growth that, we know Q1 growth will be much less this year than what was expected, and Q2 may actually decline, and Q3 and Q4 we cannot predict. That was what I said, But anyway, the point I'll make is that, growth being so uncertain, the tax revenue will also be very uncertain. We saw a sharp drop in tax revenue last year. And I think, we've projected for this year, the tax revenue will go up, but it may not go up that much, whereas expenditures will rise, not only because of health reasons, but also because the demand for rural employment will rise dramatically. Last year, we had raised the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme allocation from 60,000 crores to 1.1 lakh crores. But that was inadequate. As the RBI data showed, people got only 50 days of work per family. So, not enough work was being generated. The demand has shot up, as Ila was saying, and it's still very high as the data seems to indicate. So I think we need to step up that expenditure so as to support the poor, especially because this wave has gone deep into the rural areas, into the small towns, etc. So I think there's a lot of distress which we need to support by doing additional expenditures on supporting consumption over there. The budget would definitely have to be reformulated. I think without that, it's not going to work. And RBI adjusting for liquidity and providing credit, that will work only if the economy begins to revive. If the demand for credit is low, like for instance, last year, the RBI complained that 8 lakh crore was being deposited with the RBI by the banks because they couldn't lend. And they couldn't lend because the demand was down, investment was down, and production was down. So therefore, credit offtake was much lower than what was expected. And that same thing would happen again this year. So I think RBI steps can go only thus far. I think a fiscal package is very essential if we are to revive the economy sooner than later.
Okay, so Shankaraya, we're hearing two contrarian perspectives. One, that a fiscal package at the earliest is essential. The other, that wait till the time this wave subsides, people start looking out and then bring out another package. What do you believe would be the right approach? And do you think the government's been following the right policy interventions in dealing with the economic consequences of the pandemic?
I don't know whether the government is following anything at all. I mean, some of the steps from the budget are still hanging in the air. There was a development finance institution, one person has been appointed, so they're looking at the bad bank and stuff. But stepping aside from that, here's this thing that...
No, but to be fair to the government, Shankar, because of this pandemic, a lot of their big ticket ideas like disinvestment and privatization are naturally held back, because surely nobody can argue that this is the right time to go to the market trying to sell off any government asset.
Well, there is no right time to sell an asset. Let's face that. There is no such thing as a perfect value. There is a concept in economics called the net present value. That is, what you get now will be much more valuable than what you might expect or hope to get 10 years later. But let me just focus on what could be done. Remember that fear has no bottom. the confidence of the consumer confidence has been hit. So the government must plan now. It is nobody's case that they should give up on whatever they're doing on oxygen and medicines or whatever they did or didn't do earlier and focus on the economy. The fact is that there are departments, there is a segregation of duties. I think that I'm hoping that the plan is being worked out. Whatever that is needed to revive the growth, to prop up the MSMEs, which employ the bulk of the formal sector workers, whatever is needed to be done to revive the face-to-face economy, and whatever is needed to get the vaccination going. Those are the steps that we need to see. Now, I suspect that the opening up will be slow, public transport opening up will be delayed. All of these things will impact the projected economic growth. On the positive side, we have a healthy foreign exchange balance. April GST collections have been good. But how do we sustain growth? Credit growth has been tepid this year, again, like last year. We don't see any major investment because there is no visibility. No entrepreneur is going to put up money if he doesn't know about the second wave or the third wave. Social engagement leads to economic engagement and leads to growth. That is a simple fact. So the government has to work out a plan, and yes, it should add it to the tail of the curve, and so we get a better bang for the buck, the multiplier effect. That's a given, but we must have a plan, and that thinking should start now. That's the argument that I'm making.
Okay, so we've had an interesting conversation. All the experts have had an opportunity to, put forth their views, and there are no easy answers because there are so many unknown variables at this moment. How long will the wave last? How much time will it be before economic recovery starts? What form and shape will a third wave take? Who will that impact? Is the whole year lost, or will, as Ila Patnaik said, growth take a hit, but it won't be as bad as last year? We will keep tracking the situation, but this was an informative, engaging, insightful conversation to have, and for that I thank Professor Ila Patnaik, Niranjan Hirannandani, Nilesh Shah, Arun Kumar and Shankar Iyer for joining me on this broadcast. Thank you.